This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today, I have a special guest with us. I have Brian Holdsworth. Welcome, Brian. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Amber.
Yeah, of course. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience for anyone who maybe doesn't know who you are?
Sure. Well, I'm usually pretty terrible at my own introductions. I think I describe myself as something like a struggling thinker on my YouTube channel. I'm sort of a reluctant speaker, writer, maybe even apologist or evangelist, if you want to flatter me. Um, it's I There's a whole backstory, but I started my YouTube channel more for professional purposes, getting into videography and trying to provide a proof of concept. And then it took on a life of its own. And ever since then, I feel like I've been in this discernment process, trying to figure out, should I be investing more into this? Should I be trying to think of myself more in terms of as a speaker and an evangelist? And so that's where I find myself with a bit of a social media presence today, trying to evangelize, trying to share what I find most interesting about the wisdom and insights that I've acquired in my time, and that comes primarily through my faith.
Yeah, I think it's really fun whenever I see one of your videos pop up on my feed because I'm like, ooh, like the caption and the title is always just kind of like, what could this be about? In the sense of what was the one that you did a while ago? It was called like I forget, but it was like about like sola scriptura being like beneath God's
Beneath
goodness or
God,
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
And I was just like, oh, that sounds interesting. And the video was interesting. So I do
good.
suggest people go check out your channel for sure. And you're also a speaker, like you said, you want to get into that, and a writer, you said?
Sure. Well, writing insofar as I'm writing for the content of my YouTube channel and talks and that kind of thing. I haven't authored any books or anything yet. I would
Yeah.
love to, but yeah, between I don't do this full time. I have my day job and then my domestic responsibilities, and so finding extra time to do something above and beyond just even the YouTube channel seems pretty daunting. But who knows? Maybe one day.
Sometimes it's like a full-time job. And I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about technology and AI and stuff today too. So kind of like feeds into that. And I
Hmm.
feel like kind of just like kickstarting our talk off here, when it comes to online evangelization, I feel like
Hmm.
we've both kind of hit certain like we've both have seen the good of it, but then we've also seen the bad parts of it.
Yeah.
Catholic Twitter. And and I think there's a lot of good that can come from evangelization, but I think some people can see maybe the fame that they get from it, or
Yeah.
they see the followers, the likes, etc., and they're like, "Oh, well, I can make money from this." And then it no longer becomes about God, but it becomes about how do I get more viewership? How do I get more people? Have you noticed that too?
Absolutely. I mean, I've noticed it within, let's say, the world of Catholic celebrity, but also within my own heart. So it's I would say it's a constant temptation that is always simmering there, and it's something that you have to protect against. And I'm finding that more and more as I see the effects take root in other people's lives, because it's easier to see the sins of others than it is your own sometimes. And
True.
as I've seen that be a struggle for other people, I realize how much more protective I want to be of my own heart in the process, to make sure that this doesn't become um, that the object of, let's say, evangelization doesn't become compromised by a different end or a different intention, which would corrupt it essentially, in terms of uh, moral considerations. Um, and maybe you've experienced this as well. I After acquiring some audience, I I was invited to speak at a fairly big conference. And as a Canadian, we don't do things on the scale that Americans do.
Hmm.
And so walking into that world was a little bit startling. But I also just you get the VIP treatment and you get to go behind the scenes and interact with other Catholic celebrities who you may have admired from afar, but then realize that for some of them, this really is about the celebrity. Like they're really embracing and leaning into that. And there are people that I know that I would say I care about, who I would say I think it has gone to their head in ways that are unhelpful. And if GK Chesterton is any kind of guide on this in terms of like mental illness and the susceptibilities that we have, it's the more intelligent people that are more susceptible to mental illness. And certainly to be, a Catholic thinker and writer and speaker, you should be you should have that intellectual horsepower, right? And so some of these people who I've seen, who I admire for their intellect and the work that they've done, I've also seen them kind of go off the rails. And now, I would say that their fidelity or their position within the church is a little bit fragile. And that's tragic to see. And it's certainly not something, no amount of online influence or celebrity or money or whatever might come from it is worth jeopardizing your own faith and your own position within the church. So I think that's something we need to be really, really guarded about. And for anybody who wants to go into this kind of work, they need to anticipate that and to come up with a plan that's going to mitigate those kinds of risks, I would say.
I've definitely seen that quite a lot. I've also seen, I love what you said, because I think it really draws the point that some people are just completely blind to it. They don't always notice they're going down the slippery slope. It really kind of is a slippery slope, where if you don't
Mm-hmm.
continuously check your heart and you're not continuously making sure it's for God and stuff, you can really get trapped in that. It's all about me and I have to do things that are quote unquote scandalous, or some, not scandalous, but like talk about scandal.
Provocative, maybe.
Yeah, something to get in more viewership, to get in more money and things like that. And I mean, there are a bunch of people out there like that. I also see it on the younger spectrum, where these younger Catholic influencers are really finding their space on YouTube and Instagram, but they're also kind of stuck in that already, where they're so young that they
Mm.
don't understand the amount of or maybe they don't completely understand how to share their faith properly yet, but also they kind of get swept
Mm.
up in the whole oh, people are recognizing me from school and like people want my opinion on things. And so it's interesting to see how the younger generation is also trying to combat that, I guess, because they're starting to see similar patterns in like what they're doing, in the sense of just, they're sharing their faith, they're sharing what they do, but then they realize that certain things get more likes and clicks than others. And so they're more
Sure.
likely to share maybe their baby on their social media, or they're more likely to share more intimate moments that shouldn't be shared on social media just to get those clicks and
Sure. Yeah.
likes. Um,
Yeah.
and so I've seen so much, but like you said, what are some ways that we can kind of set up our hearts and our minds to be on guard for these things? Because it's like
Mm.
Satan is lurking in the tall grass like a roaring lion ready to devour us. It's like, how are we on social media going to combat that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think temperamentally, I'm the kind of person who has a bit of an aversion to it. I'm pretty melancholic by temperament, and so I don't like being the center of attention in certain, especially social scenarios. I tend to want to sit back a little bit more and observe. And so when I'm put in that position, I tend to recoil a little bit. And so luckily for me, that creates a bit of a barrier to some of those temptations, but they'll still come after me in other ways. And so you still do actually have to have, like I said, a bit of a game plan. And so what I would say is, sometimes in the struggle between virtue and vice, if and as we Catholics should know, virtue tends to be the mean between an excess and a deficiency, right? So if you're aiming for the virtue of courage, the deficiency would be cowardice, and the excess would be foolhardiness, right? And neither of those are a virtue; both of those are vices, and we want to aim for that golden mean. And if you have the kind of temperament that is tending towards one or the other, like maybe you're just very impulsive and sanguine, and so the rashness and you get excited about that, sometimes it makes sense to err on the side of the deficiency, to try to overcompensate for where your tendencies push you. So if you're really attracted to the allure of celebrity and being that center of attention, then I would almost overcorrect a little bit and try to be extra cautious about not trying to be the center of attention, and to try to be as private perhaps as possible, maybe even to a degree that seems excessive to you, because you're temperamentally already leaning in the other direction. Maybe be a little bit excessive in how much you share online, and trying to be a little more private, trying not to seek the spotlight, and trying to, I don't want to say discourage attention. Like on the one hand, yes, discourage attention, but on the other, you don't want to be rude to people either, right? Like I've had people approach me in person, and you don't want to be a jerk. You want to be cordial. You want to be charitable. You want to appreciate, that this is a good for them that they might be able to gain, and so you want to entertain that. But in terms of, I think the online sphere will amplify this to degrees that are kind of morbid, and so it's at that point I think that you want to try to overcorrect a little bit, and for you it's going to depend on where your temptation lies specifically. Um, I One thing that always I find a little bit alarming is like you alluded to, the Catholic Twitter sphere, because there are a lot of people on there who will tweet like 20 times a day like it's nothing, and I'm just sort of thinking like, wow, I just don't have the time for that. Like we have 8 kids, and I have a day job, and I have a professional life, and a domestic life, and a social life, and it's like if I spent that much time on Twitter, I would just have no time for those other things, right? And so I think we need to create um, criteria, at least for ourselves, if not something that's a little more standardized and formalized in terms of etiquette, for Catholics in general, to say that like there are limits to how much time we should be spending on these platforms, especially if celebrity is a temptation for us. We should be deliberately limiting our access, and the time that we spend on them.
I completely agree. And I think it's interesting too because I have seen the same thing. I schedule my posts, so I do it well
Yeah,
in advance.
yeah, me too.
But the reason I have to schedule my posts is because I'm a person who tweets and runs. So like I'll tweet something. It doesn't even necessarily have to be controversial or anything, but like I'll tweet a thread about, I think I just recently did one about like the perpetual virginity of Our Lady or something. And, that's normal, whatever, December 8th is coming up,
Yeah.
and stuff, but people will just like, and Catholics will just comment the most atrocious things sometimes,
Mm,
which is so crazy to me, but I have to like stay off Twitter for my mental health. Some
yeah.
people get really soaked into that where they're just like, oh, I have to continue like
Yeah.
responding to the rage bait and I have to respond because it's in their brain that it's like they have to defend themselves, which comes from, if you agree, as like a level of pride where we
Sure.
feel like we have to defend ourselves against strangers who don't even know us. It's,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
all fall into that once in a while, but I have noticed it so much on Twitter where it's like I see people say the most like egregious things about me and I'm just like, yeah,
Mm,
okay, whatever. It is what it is. Like that's going to happen. That's Twitter for you. But
mhm,
sometimes I think I like the word or the phrase like I must decrease so he can increase. And I
mhm.
think as content creators, that's something we really need to keep at the forefront of our minds is like, this
Definitely.
isn't about us. It really comes down to Christ. And
Yeah.
when I see people get wrapped up into that, I just honestly I feel bad for them because they're losing their peace over something that's so minuscule, something that really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things.
Sure. Yeah. We also, to the degree that you get serious with this too, you may collaborate with marketing people who are going to take a very pragmatic approach to branding, to public relations, to to the perception that your audience has about you, which is that's kind of the principle of branding. And if someone does say something negative about you, if someone is instigating bad publicity for you, well, the marketing devil on your head is going to be saying, hey, you need to deal with this particular public relations situation, right? And that can very easily feed into your ego and the pride side of it. So yeah, I mean the temptations are consistent and fairly vicious. So we have to be on our guard. And obviously, at the end of the day, the thing that's going to protect us the most is going to be prayer and grace. And so, if you intend, or if you are somebody who is doing this kind of work, if you're not grounded in prayer to begin with, you're going to have problems. Not just um, because there are temptations, but because you're also putting a target on your back for tempters, for the demonic, right? If they can lift you up just to make the impact of your downfall that much more dramatic, and more impactful on the people who have looked to you as a source of their own faith, then they're going to do that, right? And so we need to treat it seriously, and not casually, certainly, and not simply indulging wherever our appetites or our impulses are leading us.
I agree. I think also it's kind of social media has definitely dehumanized people. I've seen this
Mm.
uptick in, like we were saying before, people will become very brave if they're anonymous online.
Yeah.
I've also noticed that even when we're trying to evangelize, and I'm guilty of this as well, I have been, but recently I've gotten a lot better at it because I've kind of brought it more to prayer and brought it to my attention a lot more to make it more like, okay, I really need to work on this as a content creator. And that's just having patience with people who really,
Mm.
um, not that they ask dumb questions, but I guess easily Googleable questions.
Yes.
Those questions that it's like, oh my gosh, you could literally find the answer with like one Google search. But then
Yeah.
I think of when I was a new Catholic and I was coming into the faith, and I was like, I didn't know Catholic answers existed. I didn't know
Right.
that there was this whole big community of Catholics until, well, I became a Catholic content creator and then I realized it. But
Mm.
I mean, there was like nobody when I first came back in. And I think COVID and 2020 really like started up the Catholic content creation a little bit more because people were like, well, if I can't go out and talk to people, we got to evangelize somehow. But I definitely noticed that it dehumanizes people, where it's like if I saw this person in person and they asked me the same question, I'd be like, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let me talk to you about this. But
Mm.
because it's online, it's almost like there's a disconnect there where I'm like, oh, this person, like, why can't they just Google it? Why can't, instead of having that charity and being able to be like,
For
oh, yeah,
sure.
just reacting the same way.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Charity is owed to ideas, or sorry, it's owed to people, not ideas.
Mm.
And so that's a principle. Like, if there's an idea or an ideology out there that I'm refuting, I don't have to be nice to the idea, right? If it's a religion, like let's say I'm doing a video about Islam, I do want to be considerate of the fact that Muslims consider these ideas sacred, and so I don't want to be too irascible in the way that I present my counter arguments. But in general, if I'm just dealing with an argument or some idea that's out there, I can rip it to shreds and not be offending against charity. But with people, you can't treat them that way, right?
Mhm.
And the problem with the internet is that it obscures our sense of the human on the other side and portrays them as if they're merely ideas, right? So if I'm on Twitter, all I see is text. All I see is the idea, and I can lose appreciation for the fact that there's a human being behind that, and I'll start to treat the human being like the idea because that's all I see, right? And that's it's really spinning our instincts and our perception towards a lack of charity as a result. And so we have to be particularly on our guard to remember that yes, there's a person on the other side, and to, I would say, probably being more prayerful in the way that we interact. Because a lot of the things, and I'm guilty of this, a lot of the things that I've said to other people, I would never say to them face to face, right? I would just,
Yeah.
my humanity and their humanity would obstruct the lack of charity that sometimes escapes me online, and so yeah, I think we have to remember, we have to try to compensate for the way that the internet portrays a person as an idea a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's really hard because they'll sometimes say something and it's just like, what? And
Hmm.
it seems so obvious to us or to someone who's in the faith, but to not realize that, like you said, seeing this is just an idea as opposed to a person who is curious or maybe just led astray. And I mean, there is
Yeah.
also place for trolls, people who know what they're doing, they know what they're saying, and it's like you just don't engage with them. Like, don't even waste your time, right? What does the Bible say? Don't throw
Mm.
your pearls to swine. Just
Yeah.
don't do it. I had to do a whole video about that because there was this whole thing. There's this girl called Lizzie on Twitter, and I don't know
Mm.
her full handle, but she's very popular, always expressing her anti-Catholic opinions and everything, and everybody always falls
Oh,
for it.
okay. So she's not Catholic.
No,
Okay.
I don't know what she is actually, but she's
Mm.
very anti-Catholic. So,
Okay.
but the thing is that everybody latches onto it. Every single person will latch onto it, and then it's like she gets the publicity she wants. She gets everything, you know. And
Mm.
it was kind of the same thing with Pearl. I don't know if you remember Pearl. She was
Uh, yeah, she was on. She debated Trent Horn, didn't she? Is that the person we're talking about? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are a bunch of different podcasts, not just like Catholic ones, but just and everybody's giving her attention, so her views get further
Mm.
out there, and then guess what
Mm-hmm.
happens? Like more people follow her because of it. And she
Yeah.
her ideas are so out there. So I mean,
Mm.
it's like so bad that
Yeah.
any normal person would be like, yeah, this is like complete joke or this is a troll or maybe she does believe this but she's just, whatever. But people continue to give her publicity, and I
Mm.
liked the debate between her and Trent because Trent was able to actually defeat a lot of her arguments to kind of prove her wrong in a way.
Sure. Yeah.
But even then, it's like still giving people like her or just trolls in general any type of platform. When they know what they're doing it for attention. And you can tell because you can always have the benefit of the doubt, but there are certain tells on social media where you just know, like, okay, obviously this
Mm.
person just is doing this because they can.
Sure.
And we need to protect ourselves from stuff like that too. We don't, I mean, it's a battlefield out there. We don't just have to protect ourselves from ourselves. We also have to
Hmm.
protect ourselves from social media and being
Absolutely.
kind of sucked into disturbing our peace. I mean, at the end of the day, is it really worth giving up your peace for it? And I think I
Mm.
most recently saw that with the whole Luce debate thing with the little anime
Mm.
character guy girl thing.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
just like, I mean, it doesn't hurt, but it doesn't help. I don't know, I'm neutral about it. It's like, but
Mm.
everybody had to pick a side. And if you didn't
Mm-hmm.
pick a side, like you were the enemy. And I'm like, there's already so much division, guys. Can we calm down for a minute?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's it's sort of a rubbernecking phenomenon sometimes because rubbernecking is that expression when you're driving past an accident or something on the road and everybody slows down to gawk and to see, oh, what happened, right? And then as a result they're impeding traffic even more so than is necessary, right? And uh, I think that something of that principle is at play with the internet, and I would say with pop culture in general, because the more absurd a thing is, the more novel it is, the more outlandish it is, the more it will get attention. It's not going to be good attention, it's not going to be healthy attention, but that person or that thing or that concept or that portrayal will get attention. And so this Pearl person, I haven't followed her much, but it could be that the more that she's done this and the more she's expressed daring views, the more she was rewarded for it. And the more, if her aim was vainglory or wealth or prestige or whatever, then that's going to fuel that desire, right? And she's only going to amplify those kinds of absurd takes or traits. The other aspect of this too is mental illness or spiritual illness for that matter, because certainly I don't know if you spent time with people who are severely mentally ill. I mean, I've had a few experiences of this, but it's an experience, right? It's
Yeah.
not a pleasant experience if you're on the receiving end of some of it, but if you're a casual observer, it might be amusing in the sense that it captures your interest for a while. And if you're just bored and trying to find something that's interesting, well, a person who is manifesting severe mental and spiritual illness, that's going to capture a lot of people's attention, right? And then the condition of that person is going to be rewarded for, again, the kinds of things that come along with celebrity and influence online, which is not good for that person, and it's certainly not good for the rest of us who are exploiting their condition. So yes, there's lots of problems that come along with this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's best to, obviously, my favorite term is give the benefit of the doubt when it comes to certain things. You obviously
Mm,
can judge a book by, the action, or judge a person by their actions. That's what we're called to do. But we can't
mm,
necessarily judge their heart. And if somebody severely
no,
is struggling with mental illness, I mean, that I don't think it's an excuse, but I definitely, well, I mean, in some ways, depending on if they know what they're doing or not, but it
mm,
is a reason to kind of be like more cautious on our end and realize, like, hey, maybe this isn't the best thing to be sharing. Also, kind of encompassing all of this is the amount of just like fear mongering and I want to say just negativity that takes off in general on Catholic Twitter, because the Pope says something, instant negative reaction.
mm,
Luce's released, instant negative reaction. And it's like,
mm.
because negativity, right? It's kind of like sex sells, well, negativity sells. Because
Sure.
if it's,
Outrage sells too.
yeah, and if it's
Yeah.
intriguing and it's like giving people an excuse to be upset or mad or something, or give an outlet to their anger from whether it's been inflation for 4 years or whatever else they're struggling with in their life,
Yeah.
then they're um they're more likely to latch onto these negative things and quote unquote doom scroll or reshare things that are scandalous. I have a friend and he constantly tells me about how people just love being scandalized. Like people
Mm,
just soak it up. They see something and then people start reposting it. Catholics repost it to their people see it, then they repost it because
right.
their favorite and it just spreads like wildfire.
Yeah. Yes.
And it can be really dangerous at times when we're just consistently consuming all this negative content.
Yeah, I mean, rash judgment is a temptation. It's a sin, right? And this is one thing that's really, really hard to get right because some Christians will approach this, and certainly we will be expected to approach this from the outside because the outside is all, and by the outside I mean the secular world or the world, is very insistent upon non-judgmentalism, right? Like this is part of their moral creed, or at least they give a lot of lip service to it. They don't
Yeah.
actually abide by it, but um, there's the non-judgmental deficiency, and then there's the excess, which would be the hyper rash judgment. And what we're called to do is to make righteous judgments, and that requires us to understand what within the moral actions are accessible to our judgment, right? And so in any moral action there's the object, the thing that's done, let's say. There is the intention behind it, which also is the end in view. And then there's the circumstances surrounding it. So this could be things like a person's mental state. It could be um, their needs and requirements, right? Maybe they're in a desperate financial situation, so they had to do such and such. Um, it can be the fact that they were coerced to do it by someone else, or that someone was putting pressure on them or whatever. So those are some of the circumstances related to it. Um, we can judge a little bit about the circumstances if we have knowledge of those things, but there's going to be a lot of circumstantial things that we don't have knowledge of. We don't know the intimate details of what is compelling a person to do what they're doing. A lot of the time we only kind of see it remotely and from a distance. We certainly don't know their intention. That's the one thing we can almost never judge unless they tell us explicitly. And even then, they could be lying or they could be mistaken about what the intention is. They could be sort of deceiving themselves, which is the nature of temptation a lot of the time, right? So oftentimes we only have the object or the act itself, right? Is a thing intrinsically good, or is it good or potentially good, or is it intrinsically evil, right? If it's intrinsically evil, we can judge that. We can say, yeah, this person murdered somebody, or they raped somebody, or they blasphemed, or something like that, or they committed fornication. Under all circumstances, those things are bad, and we can judge them as bad. Can we judge their intention? Do we know what their heart was seeking? Did they have a different end in view, that they thought maybe the ends would justify the means? No, we don't know that. We don't know if this was malicious or not, or to the degree that they're culpable for it. And we certainly don't know some of the circumstances around that. So a rash judgment would look at that and say, I know what they were thinking. They just wanted to hurt other people, or they wanted vainglory, or they were greedy or lustful or whatever, and there were no mitigating circumstances that would reduce their culpability in this. Therefore, they're as bad as I could possibly and I could guess, or I could portray them as. Um, that's a rash judgment, obviously, to the extreme, and we should avoid doing that kind of thing. And the problem with the internet is that, again, it obscures a lot of that, and it invites us to make those kinds of rash judgments when it's not always warranted.
Yeah, and I think especially because of this, um, I don't know, the culture of just being able to express yourself no matter what you're thinking, not even think about it, just kind of like whether you are a person who's tweeting something that maybe shouldn't be tweeted or commenting something that shouldn't be commented.
Yeah.
It's very rare that I feel like people think about what they post or think about what
Mm.
they comment. It's very rare that people use critical thinking nowadays to respond to the things that are
Yeah.
online. And I
Yep.
think there's also a lot of confusion because now with AI being introduced, there's this whole other level of what is real, what's fake, what's created by AI, and what isn't. We were talking a little bit off the cuff about you were talking about an influencer who talked about like her morning routine, and she would type stuff into ChatGPT and then she'd use all
Mm.
these other AI editing apps. And it's like,
Hmm.
so then what's even real anymore? And I think because of that extra distance, that extra kind of disconnect, it's really taking its toll on people. Where now there's like AI Twitter accounts, like 5 followed me in the last, and
Right.
I'm not sure if they're bots or not, but I think they're real people that are just pretending to be AI people or something.
Okay.
I don't know exactly. But
Mm.
it seems too thought out to be an AI for real. But everything is
Mm.
AI. You can tell. Like, you know how AI talks, you just know that it is AI. And even though AI can be good for a few different things, I do believe it's
Sure.
becoming more saturated in our culture where kids are using it to cheat on their homework.
Mm.
You can literally look up anything in like 3 seconds or less. And is it always accurate or not? Well, you better hope so because AI came up with
Right.
it, or
Right.
AI
Right.
scoured the internet from 2021 to see. And there's no like, we kind of had this issue when Google became more popular with being able to look up anything, but now with AI where you can literally get an answer for almost anything, it's like you don't even need to think. You don't need to learn how to write a paper. You don't need to learn how to do research. You don't need to learn math. Um,
Yeah.
and it's becoming, despite the fact it's good for some things, it's becoming dangerous these days.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that with Google now, when you search this, I don't know if this is across the board, but it's certainly my experience now. When you search something in Google, it will give you an AI response
Yes.
prior to the search results, and I'm sort of like, thanks, I didn't need you to read Wikipedia for me. Like, I actually wanted to go and find some websites or some valid sources for this.
Yes.
On the one hand, I mean, it's remarkable. It's it's incredible technology and it has incredible potential behind it. But the danger with anything is that the more power something has, it can be used for incredible good, but also incredible evil, depending on what it is, right? I mean, you can split the atom and potentially use that for clean, abundant energy, or for nuclear weapons, right?
Mhm.
Which will have devastating effect. This is true of the created order as well, right? As human beings, we have great potential to do incredible good, and selfless acts of love and self-sacrifice, and nobility. But at the same time, great malice and great evil is within our reach as well, to the degree that it's not for a dog or a cat, or sort of any of the brute animals who, they can commit certain kinds of evils, but they can't layer it upon layer with malice and ongoing tortures and evils that we might ourselves commit. So, this is a thing that we have to anticipate with technology. The more powerful technology becomes, the more capable it will be of great evils. And so that at least should give us reason to be cautious about exploring it. I remember when self-driving cars were sort of becoming a thing, and like Tesla was implementing that, and I remember thinking, there's no way that the consumer protection agencies and the regulators and all these people will just allow that to go on the road. They'll never get it past those regulatory bodies in order to actually implement it. And then the next thing I knew, Tesla just added it as a feature to their car and nobody said anything. And I thought, hang on a second, you mean those regulatory bodies aren't actually, like, they tend to wait until some devastating thing happens and then they come up with their
Oh,
regulations about it, right? It's like
so
seatbelts,
annoying.
right? It's like how many people had to die before they were like, hey, maybe we should kind of add some protective measures here, right? And so it seems apparent that we're going to have to relearn that lesson with AI, that it's not until long after the fact that it's had perhaps devastating immoral effects upon us as individuals and on society at large, that we'll realize, maybe we should have been more cautious. Maybe we should have been more prudential about this. We've certainly seen this with social media, where we just thought, oh, great, more degrees of connectivity. That's exactly what I want in my life. And now, what are we, 10, 15, 20 years into this experiment?
Yeah.
And I just heard the other day that Australia has now banned social media for teenagers and for youth all the way up
Right.
until 16. So I mean, they're and is that even the right response? Like, obviously they're uh, they're coming to terms with the fact that it's not all good, right? Technology in itself isn't inherently good. Depends on how it's implemented, and it depends on how it's used. And so we should be cautious going into it, but instead we tend to only really react once the obviously negative and undesirable consequences pronounce themselves.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to kind of see that with AI too, with the deep fakes and a bunch of
Hmm.
stuff that's been going around. And it's like these people are getting their identities stolen, they're being blackmailed because of AI, and it's just so crazy. And with
Yeah.
social media, I mean, hackers have been a thing for years. Kids have
Yeah.
gotten extreme mental health disorders because of social media at such a young age. And then, yeah, it does beg the question, is banning it completely the right question for minors, or are the minors still going to find a way around that? And is it more of a
Sure.
cultural parent issue as opposed to the government stepping in to parent your kids?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because who puts the phone in their hand? At the end of the day, the government doesn't come knocking on your door and give your 5-year-old a phone. Who does that? The parents. Um,
Hmm.
and so it kind of breaks down to the whole family unit as well, and understanding, okay, this does have an entire, it's not just my home, it has an entire effect on society, how we raise the next generation.
Yeah.
um, and with all of the dangerous stuff that comes out, I mean, again, hackers, deep fakes, there have been now complete AI replicated voices.
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool at first, but then I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, people are using this to, I don't know if you've heard about this, but in America, there's a scam where scammers will use the AI voice of somebody's daughter or something and pretend like they got kidnapped. So they'll
Mm.
call their mom, sound exactly like the daughter, be like, Mom, I'm scared, I'm kidnapped, blah, blah, blah. And the hacker will be like, oh, this amount of money, blah, 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 blah. And then her daughter just came walking down the stairs and she's like, oh, hey, Mom.
Mm.
She's just like, I'm literally on the phone with you. You're kidnapped. Like, what are you talking about? So those are
Right.
some also real dangers of needing to have like a code word for your family if something actually was going wrong. Like, okay, come up with a code word, Christmas tree, something, pumpkin pie. I don't know. Oh, Christmas is on my mind. But because these things are dangerous, and
Yeah.
obviously there are some good that can come from it, of course. I mean, it can write amazing code. It can, it can really help with uh, blueprints and like it has a vast amount of knowledge, but that, like you said, it's like you can either choose good or you can choose evil. And unfortunately, in a fallen world, what are people more likely to choose? I mean, we already see how things are. Um,
Mm.
we know that Satan's the prince of this world, so it's like it's more likely that when something's introduced that people will use it more often for evil as opposed to good. But then the few of us that do use social media and AI for good, um, well, I guess I don't really use AI, but if I did, I would use it for good. and
Mm. Mhm.
it almost like outweighs each other. But again, it all just depends. It really depends. But the big corporations, big I don't know, pharma, all these big corporations and things, often they don't use these types of technologies for good. Um, and I don't know, I feel like because of the introduction of social media and stuff, people are less social than they have been in the past. And you have to view something by the fruit, right? What is the overall fruit of this specific thing? Yes, we have amazing ministries. Yes, we have great evangelization. We people across the entire world can now know who Jesus Christ is. But there's a danger with that too, where the pagans today are different than the pagans in Jesus's time, because those
Mm.
people in Jesus' time had no idea who Jesus was, had no access to a Bible. The Bible had never been compiled yet. They had
Mm.
no idea. But now people know Jesus and they actively reject him. And that's more
They
dangerous.
think they know him. Yes. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just so heartbreaking to see that people think, like you said, they think they know him, or the Catholics who fall away from the church, there's no salvation outside of it. It's just,
Mm.
it's very, very sad to see how it's kind of all spiraled into what it is today, and how
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wicca and occultism and paganism has really saturated the culture a lot more on social media, and just anywhere. Like I went to Washington State. There was a Baphomet statue in a
Mm.
restaurant. In a restaurant. And I
Yeah.
was like, what is this? And then like five people walk down the sidewalk next to me. One of them has a dog collar on. One of them is holding a leash to that dog collar. I'm like, this is degenerate. And the entire town was completely covered with crows. Which, I mean, I'm not about all
Mm.
symbolism and stuff like that, but it's kind of, it makes you wonder. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting off track. But the point is just, yeah, I've seen a lot of this stuff kind of be used more for evil as opposed to good. Now, does that mean we get rid of it completely? I don't think
Mm.
so. But yeah, what's your take on that?
Well, we could start with a seemingly more innocuous technology like social media, and we've seen what the effects of that have been. When that was originally introduced, it was introduced to us as an enhanced form of communication, right? So it's like, here's a way to stay connected with your loved ones. How could that be a bad thing? Sounds
Right.
great to me, right? But in any sort of transaction between, let's say, a provider and a consumer, I think there needs to be an aligned purpose and an aligned end. So take something like a car manufacturer. A car manufacturer manufactures a car for the purpose of creating a technology that is the means for transportation, right? The consumer on the other end of that will purchase that car for the means of transportation. That's why they're buying it. Now there can be some other sillier motivations, like, oh, I want a red convertible. It's like, well, now we're adding and layering other things onto it that might make this a little bit more complicated. But in general, that's sort of the transaction, and the ends in view, whether you're talking about the manufacturer or the provider or the consumer, are the same. They're aligned. The end is, hey, a form of transportation. Great, right? But in the case of social media, it was sold to us as a form of communication. We want to facilitate communication and a better way of enhancing connectivity with the world. This is the kind of language that Mark Zuckerberg was using, right? And that's what we adopted, and we said, okay, great, yeah, I want that. And so we, as the consumer, started using it with that intention in mind. But that wasn't the real intention behind the provider. The provider was designing this system in order to sell advertising.
Hmm.
Their whole purpose, their whole end in view, their intention, if you will, is to capture our attention for long enough periods of time that they can then feed advertisements in front of us, which is an entirely that's a sleight of hand. It's a manipulation. It's a psychological manipulation that they're doing in order to produce um, mindless consumers out of us. Now, what's our great purpose in life is to fulfill our created potential, which is to be the imago Dei, the image of God, right? Which is reason and will. Um, if someone else is trying to diminish our reason by making us mindless users of their tools, which is what we tend to be when we scroll, right? What do they call it now? Brain rot or something like that,
Yeah,
the death
brain rot.
scroll. Um, and then our will is compromised because we become addicted to these devices and these tools, right? And they're designed to be addictive, so they're manipulating us in order to compromise our humanity for the ends of selling us cheap and easy advertising, in order to make us suckers, like mere consumers, which is not our purpose as creatures made in the divine image, right? And so the ends are not aligning there, and that's going to have potentially catastrophic consequences, depending how great the effects are. And since social media has become the be all end all for most people in the way that it's eclipsed their social lives in general, right? It's become the means of their social interaction. Well, I'd say that's a pretty catastrophic effect, right? So now we're coming to terms with that. I don't know if most people can really diagnose it to that degree, because we aren't trained in ethical thought or rational thought. We don't have sort of an intellectual tradition by which we can sort of um, we can frame these considerations anymore. Those of us who are Catholic, who benefit from that intellectual tradition, we can, if we become studied in it. Um, but but for the rest of us, we just have to wait for the negative consequences to become unavoidable, and then we say, "Oh my goodness," and we recoil as if being burned from something that's too hot to touch, right? So in the case of AI, which is an even more powerful technology, it seems to me that anybody with a shred of prudence looking at this prior to it becoming common could have said, there's problems with this. There's going to be some serious moral potholes here. um, and they were obvious to everybody, even people that aren't practiced in the art of moral thinking, such as, hey, kids are going to start cheating on their schoolwork. That was obvious to everybody, and we're like, oh, okay, well, let's try and make sure that they're not, and let's try and compensate and react to that. And it's like, okay, um, it's already been unleashed on us, and that's part of the problem, is that we need to be more prudential and cautious before we just embrace any technology and start using it, or before the developers just unleash it onto the general public with no consideration about the moral consequences, which says something about the whole trust science faction of the world. It's like every single one of these technologies was given to us by scientists who gave no moral foresight to what the consequences of just throwing it at the public would produce, right? Science on its own doesn't give us moral insight. It just gives us the ability to observe what is and what happens, and then to potentially produce technology from that. But it doesn't tell us what ought to happen. It just tells us what does happen. And so the whole trust science is like, well, okay, I trust perhaps the observations of science to the degree that they're valid, but I'm not going to trust the moral constitution of a scientist to tell me what ought to be done now that we've made these observations, right? So in the case of AI, yeah, I think there's a lot of dangers with it, and I think anytime a technology exceeds your grasp or your understanding of what it is, and again, I go back to the social media, we didn't know what it was actually for when we started using it, right? And any technology that exceeds your understanding basically becomes magic once you start using it, right? Like a blacksmith will use certain kinds of technologies that to him he's trained in. He understands the alchemy behind it. He understands the tools of the trade, um, the hammer and the anvil and the steel and the different elements that are all combined and all of that. But to anybody else who wasn't a blacksmith back in the Middle Ages, he was a sorcerer, right? Like they had no idea what this guy was doing or how he did it, but thank God he did it. And that's why they would never step into his blacksmith and just start banging things around and say, hey, yeah, I can make a sword or I can make a horseshoe or something like that. It's like, no, they knew that they didn't understand it well enough and that they were probably going to hurt themselves or cause unintended consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here we are, just casually using very powerful technology that we don't understand as the end users, which could have all kinds of unintended consequences. Like here's a really maybe stupid analogy, but I'll go with it anyways because it's the only thing that comes to mind. Like imagine if someone gave you a button, like what was Staples, I think, used to have that advertising campaign where it's the red button that you just push, and
Yeah.
I don't know what that actually produced, but imagine someone gave you a red button and they said every time you push this button, it's going to add $10 to your bank account, but it's also going to produce a bunch of consequences that you don't know about. Are you going to push the button? I think most people would push the button, unfortunately, right? What are those unintended consequences? Like, for all you know, maybe it's taking a month of your lifespan away or something like that, or maybe it's taking $10 out of somebody else's bank account and you're just stealing from somebody. AI is something like that in my mind, where it's like there's a whole dimension of this technology that we just don't understand. We don't understand what it's doing, what the effects of it are going to be on us, and how we might be outsourcing our humanity in the process, and reducing our own humanity. Which, if anything is evil, anything that reduces the ontology of something or the being of something else, that's when you know it's evil. That's when it's actually becomes corrosive, And for all we know, as we outsource our humanity to these things by getting it to do our homework, or getting it to do our work for us, or getting it to write our Christmas letters for us, it's like, those are things you should be doing as a human being. Those are human activities that are good for you to do. But as soon as you outsource that, what's left of you, right? You're becoming lazy and inexperienced. And I mean, that was the reading today in the gospel, was about um, burying your talents in the ground, right? God wants us to be good stewards of the gifts that he has given us. He doesn't want us to be lazy and to forfeit the responsibilities that he's given us. And I think there's a huge risk with AI, in that it already is doing that for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see it already. My husband taught high school for a little while, and the kids, keep in mind, these were sophomores and seniors. They could not spell. When I tell you they cannot
Yeah.
spell, they can't make a complete sentence. They couldn't even finish most, if any, of their homework. Most of it came back
Mm,
completely blank. And I would read some of these pamphlets that he would have them fill out during school, and I would read some of them, and I'd be like, "What is this?" I'm like,
yeah.
this is brain rot. Like, and that's
Yeah.
another thing that I've noticed, is every single one of them uses AI. And my husband can tell,
Mm,
it's not like they're that smart about it, where they actually try to change the language. And my husband's like, "You guys can barely spell. You think you expect me to believe you guys can write out this much of a paper?" And
right.
"Oh, my girlfriend helped me with it." He's like, "Your girlfriend
Yeah.
can't spell either."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, and also what you're saying about like our outsourcing. I mean, we have outsourced so much. And I think there were great inventions for outsourcing, like the dishwasher, the laundry, stuff,
Yeah.
things that helped, right? But at the same time, we're also outsourcing going out to dinner. Now there's DoorDash. We're
Mm,
outsourcing quality time with family and friends. We call them on the phone, or we see them on Zoom or something like that. Now, granted, there's long distances, that's different.
sure.
Um, but we also kind of have outsourced our talents. I mean, AI creates
Yeah.
art now. A lot of people
Yeah.
use AI art and claim it's their own, but a lot of times it's been proven that AI steals it from other artists or
Yeah.
from other people, because AI cannot create. God is the only one who
Mm,
can create. All
mhm.
AI can do is just rip people off and maybe make it a little bit different. So it's not like exact, but it's
Right.
close enough where you're like, that's mine. And I've
Yeah.
seen so much.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a video a long time ago about, because the question of art is really interesting to me, as someone who, like, I'm a graphic designer by trade, and I've always taken an interest in fine arts even as a kid growing up. And um, I've often asked myself and tried to answer the question, like, what makes art? What is its essence? What is its substance? And not only that, what makes art good art? And the more technology kind of infringes upon the trade of art, I think the more it helps us to reevaluate this question in meaningful terms. Because yes, it's true. What the process of AI image generators is they're trained on other images that are out there, or they can go source them from the internet or whatever, and then they can't merely plagiarize them, because they're trained not to do that, or they're programmed not to do that, because that's not good to anybody. That's just, you're just a search engine at that point if you're just regurgitating images that are out there. So it's trained to reorient them or remix them. Might be a good word. That the references, pop culture and what we consider art, because that's a common so-called art
Yeah.
form, is remixing music, right? So it's basically remixing things, and then spitting it back out in a way that seems novel, in a way that we've never seen it before. Now, at the same time, that's what a lot of pop art is, right? Like, how many times have you heard a song where you're not like, okay, yeah, I've heard this beat before, I've heard this chord progression before, and it's either in a minor key or a major key or whatever, and okay, yeah, but oh, she's dressed differently, or he's got sort of a different kind of an accent to his voice or whatever. Um, a lot of the time it's just because they're so good looking that it's a distraction how bad the actual art is, right? Like, I mean, that's what
Right.
that's what pop music is basically predicated on. But a lot of it is just the same thing. We're just remixing stuff that has come before, and then adding our own little twist to it, and then saying, "Hey, there you go, new art. This is my original art." And so, in the one sense, AI art is, or AI tools are doing the exact same thing. And so then it becomes kind of perplexing. It's like, well, how is it any different? It's still art, right? But how many of us have seen an image that like is kind of impressive looking, if it doesn't, if they've managed to sort out all the glitches and things like that the AI images are known for. Like there's a guy who has a Facebook page where he's doing all like sacred art, but it's all AI generated, right? And he's upfront about that. And some of it looks really good, right? Like the kinds of prompts that he's using to say create a biblical scene. Like there was one that he did of the baptism, right, of our Lord, where it's got John the Baptist there, and our Lord is being submerged in the water, and there's sort of this tapestry of colors. It looks like a watercolor painting, and it's like, wow, if a human being had done that, I would be really impressed.
Right.
It would inspire me, right? It would edify my soul. But the fact I know that this was AI generated, I don't care at all. It doesn't
Yeah.
produce any of those effects in me. When I stand in the Sistine Chapel and I look up, or in St. Peter's Basilica, and I look around and I think like, wow, this is the product of the mind of a human being or human beings. That's incredible. That lifts my soul as a human being to say, hey, this is the human potential. um, so it has a positive effect on me in that sense. As the viewer, I get to experience something of my own humanity and the potential of my own humanity and the actuality of their humanity. That's a great experience. But when I encounter AI art, none of that happens. It's sort of like a calligrapher. When I see a calligrapher doing great calligraphy, I think, wow, that's a beautiful, amazing skill, and maybe even I could do that, and it's inspiring. When I see a printer just crank out a piece of paper with black letter font on it, I experience none of that, right?
Right.
So what is art at the end of the day? I think something within its essence is the creative potential of a human being. And AI art doesn't have that whatsoever, except for the fact that a human being created the AI. That's impressive. But insofar as it's art, it's not impressive at all. And it doesn't inspire me as a human being, and it doesn't edify my soul at all.
Yeah, I have to agree. I'll look at something and at first I'll think it's real, but the longer you look at something that's AI, the more you realize that it's AI. And
Yeah.
there was this one photo of a family at breakfast, and it was like two little girls and a dad, and it looked totally normal. Like as real as you and me. The only reason I knew it was AI was because the girl had like three arms and one of them was choking her younger sister. So I was
Mm.
like, huh. Because you look at first glance and you're like, oh, what a sweet family. And I feel like
Sure.
that's sometimes what these creators do when they make this type of art or when they prompt this art is they're like,
Yeah.
ah, cute. And then they don't even really look that hard at it. They don't see the
Right.
12 extra fingers or the weird looking eyes or the
Yeah.
whatever else is involved. And I think that's also very interesting to see how people just are willing to pump out content too,
Yeah.
without thinking of the consequences that it could cause. I don't think that there's a lot of critical thinking, but also there's I think the not the truly virtuous people, but people who are growing in virtue a lot have minimal or no social media. Not that people are like you
Yeah.
or me can't grow in it, but it takes a very special type of person. I have spiritual direction like every month, and he's very
Mm.
involved in the ministry to make sure. And I wanted to make sure that I'm not leading my people astray or having that complete, fall that we talked about earlier. Because,
Yeah.
when you have this many souls that look up to you, you're culpable for them. You're responsible for certain things. And so my spiritual director is a huge part of this ministry. And what I've noticed though is not many people have that, just in
Right.
general, even with prayer, because I don't think spiritual direction is completely necessary. I think it could just be like maybe
Mm.
talking to a priest about what you do, or maybe even just getting some outsider perspective, or listening to some of the constructive criticism that people are giving you online. And
Hmm.
recognizing that I got some constructive criticism a few years ago about my videos, and how it felt like I was just kind of taking from a bunch of different sources and I wasn't really giving much of my own opinion. It was more like I was just like an
Mm.
encyclopedia. And I was like,
Okay.
valid. Okay. Like I'm a little offended because this took a lot of research, but like I hear you. And you know what? Yes, I shouldn't just be an encyclopedia regurgitating what
Mm.
other people say. I mean, you give them credit, but people want what your opinion is. And I think I was so afraid of sharing my opinion for so long because I was afraid of becoming, these types of people that we've talked about, and making
Mm,
it more about myself. But being able to include my spiritual director in all of it, it's like it allows me to be able to be like, okay, like if there's something wrong, he'll tell me, or somebody will tell me.
mhm,
um
mhm,
but yeah, I have found it just so interesting how all of this has kind of landed us where we are today. I mean, it's so crazy that it started with like Facebook and Tumblr and all of those, MySpace, the original social medias, and now we're here with
mm,
AI and consistent, just advertisements in our face and doom scrolling and brain rot.
yeah.
And it's like, what a slippery slope, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and it's true that the imagery that AI can produce, if you're scrupulous and attentive to it, like you'll notice some of the weird things. But it's advanced significantly in a very short amount of time, and presumably within, let's say, the next 5 years, I think it'll probably be pretty flawless in the imagery that it creates. And not only that, but it'll be able to produce flawless video imagery as well. They're already um, heading in that direction.
Mm.
um, what are the consequences of that going to be if anybody online with the various kinds of appetites and sensibilities that are out there can simply say, show me this,
Mm.
right? There's going to be some pretty messed up stuff out there, not just in terms of like what it portrays, but also to the degree that it might be used to manipulate other people, right? um, we've relied on media for a long time, for our political order. It's something that is now really intrinsic to the political process, right? Like the media, to scrutinize and to evaluate and to report information back to us about our leaders and our politicians or our candidates. Um, think of like hidden cameras and things like that, or like the audio of Donald Trump saying scandalous things in his first campaign, or I'm thinking of way back in the day, Newt Gingrich was caught on like some hidden camera by CBS saying something about Hillary Clinton, which was kind of scandalous at the time. And those are the kinds of things that we have, to a degree, whether it's a little bit shady or not, relied upon to give us a sense of what are they hiding when they're not under the spotlight, right? But now we won't be able to turn to our media technology without assuming that all of it's fake. Everything that we see online could potentially be fake and indistinguishable from reality, um, which will essentially render it useless to us. AI has the potential to basically destroy whatever good is left within the technology, the media technology that we're using. And at that point, what are we left with? Like, there's some good in it, in the sense that it will hopefully force us to focus to a hyper degree on the real life and the local, what's actually within our horizon of understanding. But I don't know, maybe there will be some reaction that will encourage us to go even deeper down that rabbit hole in the meantime. But I think that that's the obvious potential of where this is going, is that everything we see online we're going to have to assume is not real anymore. um,
Yeah.
and that's devastating to the use of the information that we take for granted these days.
Yeah, and it's so crazy how it seemed to have just happened so quickly too. I mean, things have been
Yeah.
around for a lot longer that are now just, well, I mean, social media's really only been around for 25 years, and now it's
Mm,
where it is today. But I guess it's one of those things we're just gonna have to kind of wait and see where it goes. But
yeah.
yeah, it's just so crazy to think about. But I guess as we kind of just wrap up here, is there any
Mm.
last minute advice you have for anyone going into this type of work, or just social media in general?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably just reiterate some of the things that we've talked about guarding yourself against the whatever excesses or deficiencies your temperament or your character seems drawn to. Be grounded in prayer. Spiritual direction is something that you had mentioned is really helpful. um, Avail yourselves of the sacraments. It's but possibly never been more necessary as our humanity is imposed upon and potentially even jeopardized. Make sure you're going to confession at least once a month. Make sure you're going to mass every Sunday at least, and receiving as often as you're possible or you're capable of. Um, and be skeptical of this. Don't be an enthusiastic participant. the more the more easily um, we can produce things, the more superficial and meaningless they will become. I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce. Right, his portrayal of hell is one in which anybody can conjure up anything they want at any time, but it doesn't satisfy anything because it's just meaningless and superficial. So he portrays Napoleon at one point as living way off in the distance, where completely inaccessible to anybody else because it's an infinitely large plane that people can just spread out within and avoid all the other nasty people that are down there. And these two people report having finally found Napoleon in a giant mansion that he just conjured up out of his own thought, pacing back and forth, talking about all the people he's blaming for his blunders and his failures. Um, it seems to me that the more that we immerse ourselves in this virtual sphere that is all fabricated and all fake and all superficial, the more we will be unsatisfied with it and simultaneously incapable of creating anything that will satisfy us because we've outsourced everything. We've never bothered to test ourselves or to be strengthened in the way that the crucibles of life tend to produce those effects. So be limit your access to these things and limit your exposure to them, um, because they're not it's not all good. Some of it can be used for some goods, but only as long as we're being prudential and cautious about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think everybody after this podcast take a social media detox.
Hmm.
Just
Advent is a great time to do that.
exactly. And I think especially now with everything going on, it's just like, yeah, we need a social media detox more than ever. I mean,
Yeah.
especially for the holiday season, enjoy the season with your family, enjoy,
Right.
decorating and doing all those things that maybe you used to do as a kid and don't do anymore. And I
Yeah.
just think that now is the time, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But with all of that being said, thank you so much, Brian, for coming on here and talking with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And where can my listeners find you real quick?
Probably my website, brianholdsworth.ca. And so all of the various platforms that I'm on are linked to from there. So like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, I think are the only ones. But or just Google me and you'll find me on various sources.
I like Googling myself sometimes. It's fun.
Yeah.
But yes. No, I really appreciate it, Brian. Thank you so much. And with all that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode and you learned something. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye. That was awesome.